Let me start by explaining a bit the context and why drone network twins is so important, and a bit about the challenge we were trying to face. So let's imagine a bit the standard decision support models we have for branches in banking or any retail network, all other industries. Typically, if you think about it, we tend to look a bit to historical data, like how we have been performing in the last years, what's the performance of our teams, what's the regional context, and so on. And on top of that, sometimes we look at a very macro level. How are we doing in that region? How are we doing in that city? So if that used to work, and I come from a financial service perspective, but I've worked with this model also in the industry level. This worked like 20 years ago. Nowadays, with all the data we have and all the artificial intelligence model we have, like, this makes no sense. So basically, drone wants to, and what it does is try to address this problem and try to work at the micro level. So basically, instead of trying to answer future challenges with past information, what we start doing is to consolidate information from several sources to give an answer based on the market, not our behaviors. So when I look at, let's say, borrow in London, I don't care about my history there, because that history is conditioned by mergers I had. It's conditioned by the teams I've placed there, by the clients I have there. I want to know what's the current reality of that market, who lives there, who works there, who travels around there. And I want to know the reality of that market, that specific market. I want to know the reality of Camden, not London as a whole. So this is the main premise around the drone model. So, and this model, as Tiago said, is already, I would say, around 7 years old, and it has been constantly evolving. So we started with this premise of we want to work at the micro level. Then we had the premise of, okay, we want to work with the current data. And now we evolved it to be a branch, if I may, of a network twin. So not only I want to work with very granular data, I want to work with live data, but I also want that data to be integrated with my own data. So what if I change my processes? What if I change my strategy? So if I change, if I move some lever in my operations side, that naturally has a reflex on my network. So in a nutshell, that's drone. So it's an integrated decision system that allows to combine my internal information, my market information, and to assess in a very controlled and digital simulated environment all the drivers that contribute to deciding all my physical, or at least physically related strategies. But instead of just me being talking, let me show some slides that I think will better illustrate what I mean. So, as you all know, Portugal, we are a very small country in Southern Europe, but even if we think of Portugal, and if you think of Lisbon, which, although it's a capital, it's a very small city, we are talking about a city of 1 million inhabitants. Even in this very tiny context, if we look inside Lisbon, Lisbon has 18 parishes, and even if you look at those parishes, there's a huge span of market shares and the different types of population inside these very small cities. So if we have this context in Lisbon, just imagine if we're talking about New York, Mumbai, or London. So it's impossible to have a commercial strategy based on Lisbon. Lisbon is too wide, as a huge range of realities. I cannot have one reality for Lisbon. And this is what these numbers show. So I have different education levels, I have different age levels, different wealth, different employment, different types of company. So this is why it is fundamental to work at the micro level. And this is what I meant by it's not enough not to work at a very, very, very granular level. So with this in mind, what does drone allows? So drone allows you or us to have a model that allows us to create micro market analysis. So with all the data combined, and I'll go a bit further or a bit deeper in what are these data, but allows me to know which people live in a specific micro market, and this micro market means as small as a neighborhood or part of a street. So who lives there, who commutes there, what are the companies, what are the age of the inhabitants, what are their kinds of transactions, and this allows me to know, okay, which kind of physical presence do I need, but not just only the number of branches or the number of points of sale, but what kind of points of sale. Should I have a flagship store? Should I have a transactional store? Should I have a fully automated store? Or should I have no store at all? And should I focus on a digital presence? So, and this allows me to have a tailored business plan. So I can then look at, if I know my total potential for a specific micro market, I can know what is my current status there. So it's a simple matrix. So if I know what is my potential and how well am I performing, I can assess the gaps. So I can have a business plan to address those markets where I could have a huge potential, but I'm not performing that well. And in those that where the potential is not that great, but I'm actually overperforming, okay, so maybe there are some good practices there, and maybe I should not overinvest there. Finally, and as a corollary, so this brings me an effective commercial strategy. So if I manage to allocate my resources in an adequate form to each of these markets, naturally, I'm very much more efficient. I can leverage all this data into more growth and more profitability. And specifically, I can make sure that all my actions are tailored to the specifics of that micro market. And there's an example I really like, but if you are in, for example, retail banking and you want to target doctors, it's much easier if you know where the doctors are. So this is all about data and having the AI and the analytics to currently update and work upon that data and create the models around it. So without getting too repetitive, drone is not only about the physical presence. So even because nowadays, as we all know, we are shifting towards more and more digital way of working. If I may, actually, in the future, let's see if this stays the same. But I'll be glad to discuss further this offline if you want. But I can work with all this data and knowing very well my market. Where should I be? I can know what are my clients and what's the best pricing strategy to address them. What's the best commercial dynamic? Should I address them via public outdoors, TV ads, promotions? Should I have a private banking way of working, or should I have like low-cost retailing ads and so on, like acquisition strategy, even the sizing? So if I know where my clients are, I can size my teams not to my historical perspective, but to the growth I want to have in the future years. So there are a lot of use cases that you can leverage using drone, because once again, the great advantage is that it combines these three aspects. And sorry to repeat them, but I really think this is the interesting part, which are on one side, having the information very detailed at the micro level. The second one, having several sources of information combined at the same time. And the third one, this digital twins component that allows us not only to look at the external information, but also understand the effects that my internal processes and my internal decisions have on my strategy, combining with that external information. Okay. Naturally, as a consultant, I could not escape a commercial slide, but we have had a lot of very positive results with drone. We have worked not only in Portugal, but we've done some projects also with our colleagues here from Brazil, Mexico, Spain, Angola. So we had a lot of very positive results, especially in the part of the optimizations branch, the sizing and portfolio, the sizing and portfolio definition. It's actually one of the aspects where we have been seeing the strongest relationship with the digital twins part. And I hope I'm not going into any confidence here, but As you all know, we have this global alliance with NVIDIA, and that's where we have been working a lot on how to leverage all these assets, all these AI assets we have with NVIDIA, to combine them with these real-time. So because if I have the information of clients, I have also the information of external data like telcos and transactions, and the models and the resources from NVIDIA, I can almost in real time allocate a set of resources and make a set of real-time decisions for the portfolio and sizing. Not because this is a lot focused in banking, but if you think about retail or oil and gas and so on, there's a lot of decisions that can be made almost live. And finally, the revitalization growth plans, which go back to the matrix I was talking about. So if I have a micro market or a branch or a point of sale where I identify there's a huge potential and the real volume at the moment is low, there's a gap there. So I can see for each segment of client, each profession, each age group, each type of company, where am I underperforming? And then do a tailored strategy for that specific group. And we have seen in a period of 9 to 12 months, a 10 to 30% incremental business growth on these markets. So now moving, since this is an AI session, it's important also to talk about the core part of the model. So regarding the sources of information, we have 4 big blocks. So the first one is society and demographics. So basically, our starting point is getting all the information from census and placing into a geoinformatical system to map all the individuals in a specific market to understand age, profiling, location, and so on. And then we cross it with company information. So we are always talking at the coordinate level. So then we get all the databases to understand where companies are, what's their number of employees, their turnover, what's their sector of activity, in what range do they work in, what's their influence radius, and so on. So to understand not only where people live, where the companies are, but also this interaction, because this also helps us understand a part that I'm going to talk in pillar 4, but which is the commuting, because I don't want to only know where people live and where the companies are, but also the shift from where people live to where they actually work. And the third part, called the distribution network, and let's take the example of a bank or an insurance company or a petrol station company. So which is where are the points of sale of the client that I'm working on. So understanding exactly where are my points of sale and where are my competitors' point of sale. But the distribution network doesn't end there, because there's something super important for those of you that already worked with retail and specifically with distribution networks, which is understanding all the transportation networks there are. So roads, trains, subways, buses, airports, train stations, and so on. So the distribution network is not only from the commercial perspective, but also the distribution of resources and people. And finally, third-party data. And I'm glad I'm talking to this privileged group, because as we know, every day there's a new source of data we can use. So when we started working with this project 8 years ago, the sources of data were limited. Nowadays, we have telcos, we have data from Google, we have data from Waze, we have data from external providers that their only main focus is collect data from games and so on. We have data from the clients themselves, data from transactionality, MasterCard, Visa, you name it. So every day there is a new source of data that we can leverage on. So regarding the micro markets, a point that's important here, and not as much from the analytical perspective, because as I was saying, we work always at the coordinate level and at the individual level, but there's always that point where we have to sit with the marketing teams from the companies, and we have to make decisions. We have to take decisions, and those decisions cannot be made at 3 meters or 10 feet area logic. So we have to create markets that are relatable to those making decisions. So that's why for different areas, we create different sizes of micro markets. And thinking again of the example of London, that I expect to be more familiar than Lisbon. By the way, you are always welcome to come to Lisbon to get to know our markets. But if you think of London, maybe if I'm in the center of London, Marylebone or Camden will be one micro market. But if you go to outside of London, then a micro market would be bigger because there's less population, less companies. And if you go to Birmingham or Nottingham, maybe each city by itself could be one micro market. So naturally, the definition of a micro market depends on the number of points of sales, the population there, the competition, and so on. So, but once again, these micro markets at their frontiers are not barriers. They don't influence the model itself. They are just proxies we create to help the decision makers from the business side. So regarding quantification, and without, I'll try not to bother you with the details. And once again, I'm more than happy to discuss all the science behind the model. So how do we calculate this? And I'll break this into two slides. The first slide is how do we calculate the business potential of the market itself? So we distribute people and companies in the informatical geographical information system, as I said. So basically, we get Portugal, and we get like the 10 million people. We distribute them according to where they live, coordinate by coordinate, individual by individual, all the companies. We get all the data we have. Then the second part is analyzing the commuting, as I was saying, and without measuring the words. To be honest, I don't care where people live normally, because most of the transactions that people do is where they work. So, and actually we have to adjust this. I have to understand not only where they work, but also where they live. And not only that, where do they spend their time? Because depending on the type of business I'm working on, it could change. And not only that, it could change with time. So if you think about it, if I'm opening a chain of restaurants that service brunch, I just care about people that are in a specific space between 9 and 12. If I have a branch, then I want all day. If I'm serving dinner, I want to know people between 7 and 9. So nowadays, even the period of time is important. And that's why we leverage on data like telcos and transactionality. So we added the dimension of location, but now we also have the dimension of time. The third step is calculating the profile on what is the value of a specific customer. And naturally, we don't know what's the value of Andre or Tiago or Van or whoever. So we know the value of clusters, and we do this based on benchmarks we have from previous projects and based on the value of each client. So typically we work around 920 clusters for individuals, and then we allocate each of the individuals to each of these clusters. So, and this then is basically a multiplication step. So all the individuals multiplied by the value of their cluster gives me the total market potential. With this information calculated, then we'll do an analysis of understanding how this potential that up to this point is agnostic to the players, to understand how do all the competitors in a specific area are competing and gathering all this potential. So the first step naturally is mapping all the players, understanding where they are, what's their main characteristics, because it's not just the place, but if they are more exposed or not, if they have a front door or not, if they are open to the public, if they have a parking space. Then second step, calculating how attractive is the place they are. And to be and in total fairness, these actually are two aspects, not just how attractive is the local they are, but also how attractive is their brand, because you could have two spaces in two points of sale in exactly the same space. But if you have an Amazon Fresh in one site, and I don't want to be prejudiced, but an Aldi in the same place, they have totally different brand awarenesses. They attract different kinds of customers. So we have to take this into account. Then we calculate also the probability of their level of how digital they are, and using a model that's known probably to all of you with some twists, we use the F gravitational model to define the probability of each individual and each company going to each point of sale. So in a nutshell, the sum of these probabilities calculates the potential for each of these points of sale. So I'm almost in reaching the end of my presentation, but I think I can steal 1 or 2 minutes from my next colleague. But so what are the outputs? Which is funny because my next colleague in some way, it's me, but what are the outputs of drones? So we actually have 2 outputs. So we produce one more consulting, more traditional consulting output, which is a PowerPoint deck with a summary for each micro market with all the information regarding what's the population density, what's the potential, the analysis of the client itself, how are the competitors located, what was the evolution of the competition, and a set of recommendations, those that I mentioned. So how many branches should you have, what type of branches, what team, and so on. And we have a second, sorry, I pressed, not a problem. And the second output, which is a dashboard that allows what I was mentioning of gathering the information from the client itself, which is the digital twin part of drone that allows us to also move some levers to understand what's the impact of certain business decisions on the model itself and understanding the impact on the recommendations. So in a nutshell, drone aims at understanding how, based on a huge amount of information that thankfully it's growing by the minute, how can we leverage on that information to drive growth, to act at a micro level without losing scale. So the great advantage is that I don't have to have a project that takes 10 times more to be 10 times as more detailed. So, and finally, this next aspect that we truly believe that's revolutionizing the way we are looking at distribution networks, which is this part of having the digital twin, or as we call it, the network twin, allowing to, as soon as I make a change in my organization, so for example, if I change how long a process takes, quickly understand what's the impact it has on my decisions and how I converge to my markets.